The air inside the arena was heavy, thick with a tension that felt less like anticipation and more like a surrender. For months, the narrative had been singular: monopoly on power held by one faction that believed they were destined to rule forever. In the center of the ring stood the figurehead, the champion who had convinced the world that resistance was futile. He held the microphone not like a tool of communication, but like a scepter. The crowd booed, a low rumbling frequency of disapproval, but there was no fire in it. They were beaten down by inevitability. They had seen challengers rise and fall so many times that hope had become a dangerous thing to hold on to. The champion spoke, his voice echoing off the rafters, dripping with an arrogance earned through years of dominance. He told them there was no one left. He listed the legends he had retired, the heroes he had broken, and the future stars he had extinguished before they could burn bright. The commentary team sat in somber agreement, selling the reality that we were living in an era of absolute tyranny. The camera panned to the faces in the front row, children looking at their parents, wondering if the good guys ever actually win. It was a masterclass in emotional suppression. The show was closing. The credits were ready to roll. The night was supposed to end with the villain standing tall, unchallenged and unchanged. The producer's finger was hovering over the fade-to-black button. The script was written in stone. But the beautiful thing about live television is that silence is often just the deep breath before the scream. It started with a glitch, not a mistake in the truck, but a calculated disruption of reality. The Titantron flickered, cutting the champion off mid-sentence. The arena went pitch black. For 3 seconds, 20,000 people held their breath in unison, a vacuum of sound that felt louder than any explosion. Then, the first note hit. It wasn't just a sound. It was a physical force that slammed into the chest of every person in the building. The recognition was instant. It was a frequency that hadn't been heard in years, a sonic signature that triggered a biological response in the audience. The lights didn't just come back on, they detonated. The roar that followed wasn't human. It was seismic. It was a guttural, primal release of years of pent-up frustration. The camera shook violently, not because the operator was unstable, but because the floor of the stadium was vibrating. The commentary team abandoned their headsets, standing up screaming over the noise, their voices cracking with genuine disbelief. "It can't be. It's not supposed to be here," screams filled the audio feed, barely audible over the tsunami of crowd noise. The champion in the ring, usually a statue of composure, took a half-step back. That subtle movement was the story. Armor had cracked. As the figure emerged from the smoke at the top of the ramp, the timeline of the industry shifted. This wasn't just an entrance. It was an invasion. The walk down the ramp was slow, methodical, soaking in the adoration, not with a smile, but with a terrifying focus. The atmosphere shifted from despair to electric, dangerous hope. The music cut. The silence that followed was heavier than the noise. 2 titans stood 10 feet apart, separated only by the canvas and a history that had never been settled. The returning legend didn't play to the crowd. He didn't climb the turnbuckles to pose. He simply walked to the center, picked up a microphone, and stared a hole through the champion. He could hear the shutter clicks of 1,000 cameras, capturing a frame that would be printed on t-shirts for the next decade. The champion tried to speak, tried to regain the high ground, but the crowd wouldn't allow it. They drowned him out, seizing control of the show. When the legend finally spoke, he didn't shout. He whispered. He spoke with a calm shock that was far more terrifying than any screaming promo. He didn't talk about belts or titles. He talked about legacy. He dismantled the champion's entire reign with 3 sentences, exposing the insecurity hidden beneath the bluster. He looked the tyrant in the eye and told him that his kingdom was built on sand. "You didn't win because you're the best," he said, the words echoing in the silent arena. "You won because I wasn't here." It was a line that blurred the reality between the character and the man. It felt unscripted, raw, and dangerous. The commentary team went silent, letting the gravity of the accusation hang in the air. This wasn't a challenge for a match. It was an eviction notice. The champion's eyes darted around, looking for an escape, looking for his faction, but for the first time in years, he was completely, utterly alone. The physical altercation was brief, but the violence was implied. The champion, cornered and humiliated, lashed out. A desperate swing, a wild attempt to regain dominance. It was countered effortlessly. The counter wasn't a finisher. It was a dismissal. The legend simply shoved him away, a display of power that said, "You are not on my level." The champion stumbled, retreating through the ropes, clutching his title belt not like a prize, but like a security blanket. He backed up the ramp, eyes wide, realizing the landscape had changed. Backstage, the chaos was palpable. You could feel the producers scrambling, the writers tearing up the scripts for the next 3 months. We cut 2 shots of the champion's family at ringside, their faces masking genuine concern. The invincible aura was gone. Social media timelines were already melting down, the clip of the return garnering millions of views in minutes. The news spread outside the wrestling bubble. This was pop culture breaking news. The commentary team tried to sign off, but they were stammering, unable to summarize what they had just witnessed. They spoke in fragments. The hierarchy has changed. Everything we knew is gone. The visual of the legend standing tall in the ring, simply watching the champion retreat, was the defining image. It was the visual representation of a regime change. The fear in the champion's eyes was the payoff. We realized then that the physical match didn't even matter yet. The mental war had already been won in under 10 minutes. As the show faded to black, the lingering feeling wasn't just excitement. It was a profound sense of correction. We often talk about moments in wrestling, flashy sequences that pop the crowd but fade by morning. This was different. This was historical punctuation. It forced us to look back at the last few years of storytelling and recontextualize everything. The champion's dominance suddenly looked like a placeholder era, a waiting room for the true king's return. But the twist, the element that added real depth, was the realization of what this return actually represented. It wasn't about the past coming back to bury the future. It was the industry's way of saying that greatness is the only currency that matters. The legend didn't come back to steal the spotlight. He came back to force the champion to become better or perish. It was a test. The shock of the entrance was the hook, but the story was the challenge. In that one segment, the hero became a mentor of violence, and the villain became a vulnerable human being. The night changed not because a famous face walked through the curtain, but because the invincibility myth was shattered. We stopped watching a show and started watching a fight for survival. The credits rolled, but the story had just begun.